On Friday the 17th of October, the Chinese Ministry of Defense put out a statement announcing that 9 of the country's top generals were expelled from the military and the Chinese Communist Party for, and we'll quote them here, serious violations of discipline and law, which in China usually is code for corruption. Among the ousted generals was He Weidong, vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, CMC, the body that leads the Chinese Communist Party and widely considered one of the most powerful men in China. His removal marks the first time that a sitting general is removed from the CMC since the Cultural Revolution, close to 50 years ago, underscoring just how significant a move this was. Neil Thomas, an expert on elite Chinese politics at the Asia Society Policy Institute, told the Financial Times, and we'll quote him here, "The fact that Xi Jinping can purge a CMC vice chair shows how serious he is about stamping out corruption in the military. Xi wants to turn the PLA into an effective fighting force beyond China's borders, but also into a complete servant to his domestic agenda. Beyond corruption, there are those who view the purge as a way for Xi to consolidate his power and stave off a potential coup, rumors of which have persisted for a while now. The purge has also raised troubling questions about the state of the People's Liberation Army, or PLA. If corruption was indeed as widespread as these dismissals seem to suggest, then what does it say about the military's effectiveness? Can an army riddled with internal problems truly project power abroad, as China sought to do? And does this upheaval strengthen or weaken the PLA at a time when tensions with the US continue to escalate? Factionalism and coup speculations. So, as we mentioned in the introduction of the video today, 9 generals were removed in the October purge. We chose to focus on He Weidong for 2 reasons. 1, how unprecedented his removal was given his rank, and 2, his close ties to Xi Jinping. Dr. Zi Yang, an associate research fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or ASIS, wrote in The Diplomat that the relationship between the 2 men goes back decades to the time they served in Fujian province, a coastal region in southeastern China that sits directly across the Taiwan Strait from Taiwan. Yang further asserts that He's rise to the top was primarily the result of Xi's patronage. It's funny that they're called he and she. The mention of Fujian is important here because, according to Bloomberg, several of the other ousted officials, including Miao Hua, former director of the CMC's Political Work Department, and Ling Jianyang, former commander of the Eastern Theater Command, also served in the province. These officials formed the Fujian clique, which, alongside the Shanxi gang and the new Zhejiang army, formed the Xi Jinping faction, and they were the primary beneficiaries of Xi's earlier anti-corruption purges. In his inaugural address, when he first came to power in 2012, Xi specifically called out corruption as one of the most pressing challenges that the Chinese Communist Party had to address. Some of Xi's earliest targets included Zhu Kaihou and Guo Boxiong, 2 former CMC vice chairmen who were implicated in a cash-for-rank scheme. By early May 2016, Xi's anti-corruption campaign had reportedly resulted in the arrest of at least 60 military officers, although some analysts believe that the actual numbers could be higher. Most of the ousted officials were thought to be members of a faction within the Chinese government called the Shanghai Clique, which had risen to power during the rule of former CCP General Secretary Jiang Zemin. The fall of the Shanghai faction allowed Xi Jinping to appoint members of his faction to influential positions. However, by 2023, Xi had been turning on them, starting with the Shanxi gang, military leaders who shared connections to Xi through his family's home province of, well, you guessed it, Shanxi. After this purge, Xi promoted members of the Fujian clique into positions previously held by Shanxi gang affiliates, which, according to Nicholas Zarbin, editor-in-chief of the Lafayette Global Review, indicated that he trusted the clique's members. We told you all of this to illustrate several points. 1. In order to thrive and to a large extent survive within Chinese politics, you need to be part of the right faction and to have the president's support. 2. It's very easy to lose that support. And 3. Once you lose that support, you're usually on your way out. So let's ask the million-dollar question. What did He Weidong and the rest of the Fujian clique do to lose Xi's trust? According to Deng Yuwen, an independent scholar and columnist writing for Think China, an English-language magazine focused on China, we can immediately rule out the idea of the Fujian faction plotting a coup against Xi. Quoting him here, "First, from the standpoint of Chinese political orthodoxy, rebellion has always been a heinous crime punishable by death and collective extermination. Second, He was regarded as one of Xi's most trusted military confidants, elevated to a position second only to one man. He thus had no motive for rebellion. Moreover, senior military officers today are under constant surveillance, leaving virtually no chance of success for a coup attempt." End quote. Michael Cunningham, a non-resident fellow of the Center for China Studies, National Taiwan University, takes it a step further, writing for the Lowy Institute that despite the expulsions, no military officer would risk trying a coup because of how extensive Xi's control over the army is. We'll quote him here. "To be sure, something strange is happening in Beijing. Since Xi began his third term in 2022, several of his hand-picked appointees have been removed, prompting speculation about a power struggle in the Chinese Communist Party. Most of the activity has occurred in the military, leading some to conclude that Xi is losing control of the armed forces. Despite the noise, no one has credibly explained how a leader who dominates every significant CCP organization could be toppled." End quote. So then, if it's not a coup, what is it? Well, according to UN, the most likely reason is because he, Miao, and the others went behind Xi's back and formed a clique to control personnel selection and promotion. This would undermine all the work that Xi has done to root out corruption from the army and make it a modernized force. Tristan Tang, an associate fellow at the Research Project on China's Defense Affairs, agrees with this assessment, writing for the think tank Jamestown that the 9 ousted generals appeared to have formed an improper personnel network centered around Miao Hua and He Weidong, echoing the crimes of Xu Kaiho and Guo Boxiong. So, this is just another run-of-the-mill corruption scandal involving some high-ranking officials. Case closed, right? Well, no, not quite. Because if corruption was this widespread, what does that mean for the Chinese military? And just before we answer that question, we have a question for you. Do you enjoy what we do here at WarFronts? Do you want more episodes, more analysis, deeper insights into the stories that are shaping our world? Do you crave these kind of stories at the intersection of grand strategy, global conflict, and geopolitics? Well, that's why our team has recently unveiled Fronts.co, our brand new website designed to provide you with exactly that. Our writers at WarFronts and Political Fronts gather at Fronts.co to take an even closer look at the wars, the strategy, the politics, and the technology that define this moment in history. Every week, we release 2 exclusive video episodes that can't be found anywhere else, including our Briefing Room, a regular roundup of underreported stories that deserve your attention. We also publish 2 expert articles each week, drawing on journalists and analysts who've chosen to share their insights with our audience and the wider world. Elsewhere on the site, you'll get early access to every extended deep dive episode we release here on WarFronts, plus inside access to behind-the-scenes content, unreleased episodes, new merch offerings, and more. A subscription is just $5 a month or $50 a year, and it helps us grow our free offerings here as well. So, if you want to support this channel and get a ton of content in return, head to fronts.co. We'll put a link in the description below, although it's quite easy to type, isn't it? It is expensive. And thank you for your support. The impact. One of the most underreported aspects of these expulsions is the timing. According to Taylor Fravel, a professor of political science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, writing in Foreign Affairs magazine, the timing is important because in 2027 the PLA will be celebrating 100 years since its formation. By that point, Xi Jinping expects China to have made significant strides in its modernization efforts. Additionally, according to former CIA Director Bill Burns, Xi has instructed the PLA to be ready by 2027 to conduct a successful invasion of Taiwan. And that timeline is, in a word, ambitious, and it relies on a lot of things going right. But given the scale of this and past purges, it's likely that the PLA won't hit those targets. Quoting Fravel's piece in Foreign Affairs, the purges themselves are likely to slow some weapons modernization programs, disrupt command structures and decision-making, and weaken morale. The Center for Naval Analysis, or CNA, an independent non-profit research and analysis organization, was a lot more pointed in its assessment, laying out 4 major concerns. First, if officers reached their positions through bribes instead of merit, their ability to actually command effectively becomes questionable. Second, if weapons contracts went to companies offering the biggest kickbacks rather than the best equipment, then the military's critical systems might not work as advertised. Third, morale among regular soldiers and junior officers is likely to take a hit when they see so many top brass getting fired for corruption. And fourth, the purges are stripping the PLA of experienced leaders, creating operational chaos as their replacements try to figure out what they're supposed to be doing. And these issues are likely to compound in the coming months, because as a CCP official told reporters, and we'll quote them here, China's fight against corruption is a protracted battle with no finish line. signaling that more military firings could be on the way. In the short term, at least, this suggests that Beijing will be forced to exercise greater caution before pursuing large-scale military operations such as an amphibious assault on Taiwan, even as it continues to exert pressure on Taiwan with aerial activities and naval patrols around the island. In the South China Sea, where Beijing has been pushing its territorial claims hard, the purges might actually lead to a reduction in Chinese aggression. For now, the Chinese Coast Guard has maintained an almost daily presence at reefs that China deems strategically or symbolically important within the exclusive economic zones of other Southeast Asian countries. The Coast Guard uses two of these reefs, Lusonia Shoals and Vanguard Bank, as staging grounds to harass nearby oil and gas drilling by Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. China has particularly targeted the Philippines in these attacks, with dangerous collisions and water cannon attacks on Philippine resupply missions becoming more frequent, while Chinese vessels venture deeper into Philippine waters. According to Admiral Steve Kohler, US Pacific Fleet Commander, while the attacks have ramped up, they haven't had the desired outcome. Quoting him here, "China's pressure is not working well. It has failed to intimidate Southeast Asian claimants and make them surrender their sovereign rights." So given the internal wrangles and the limited success that Beijing's pressure campaign has had, it's possible that President Xi decides the risks of a major confrontation outweigh the potential gains, at least until he's certain that the PLA is ready for such an engagement. Now, none of this is to say that the Chinese army is weak or not a threat. As Pete Hegseth, US Secretary of Defense, put it during this year's Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, "We're not going to sugarcoat it. The threat China poses is real, and it could be imminent." For all the issues plaguing its military, China does have two things working for it that most nations don't. One, political control. Xi doesn't have to worry about public opinion, congressional approval, or election cycles when making military decisions, which means he can play the long game without having to deal with the same constraints that democracies face. He can fire a whole load of generals without worrying that the public will turn on him. 2. Industrial speed. China's shipyards are pumping out warships faster than anyone else on the planet, and its defense industry can scale up production in ways that would take Western countries years to match. And that leads us to our final question. Where's China go from here? What's next for China? So to properly answer this question, we need to break it down in the short term, accounting for the next year or so, the medium term, accounting for 2 to 3 years out, and the long term, meaning the back half of this decade and beyond. In the short term, Xi's primary concern is replacing the generals he purged without destabilizing the military further. He has already tapped Zhang Shengming to replace He Weidong, which gives China observers an idea of what Xi's priorities are right now. Zhang is from the Shaanxi province, and since 2017, he has served as the Chinese military's top anti-corruption officer, heading up disciplinary inspections for the CMC. Zhang spent most of his career in the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, the branch of the Chinese military responsible for long-range missiles. His elevation indicates that Xi wants someone who is both close to him and understands the factional politics of the CCP and has a proven track record in rooting out corruption. We don't know who else Xi will appoint, but if they do follow the same track as Zhang Shengming, then they might be other members of that same faction with similar anti-corruption backgrounds. This will be important for the medium term, where Xi's primary objective seems to be rooting out corruption from the PLA and transforming it into a modern fighting force capable of standing toe-to-toe with any modern army. This will mean fundamentally restructuring how the PLA operates and, if necessary, conducting further purges, which might cause more instability. However, according to William Matthews, former senior research fellow, Asia-Pacific Program at Chatham House, this is a risk that Xi seems willing to take. Quoting him here, "In Xi's mind, a politically compliant and minimally corrupt PLA equals a combat-ready PLA. To Xi, any short to medium-term instability at the highest levels of the PLA command structure and the reputational cost that it incurs is a price worth paying to achieve his goal." In the long term, the goal is simple: for China to resume pursuing its original geostrategic goals in places like Taiwan and the South China Sea, with a competent army free of the corruption scandals that have so far riddled the PLA. Getting there is going to take time, which creates a window of opportunity for the West. As Beijing works to fill vacancies, restore morale, and root out corruption, Washington needs to strengthen its presence in the Indo-Pacific, strengthen its allies' abilities to defend themselves, and make it as difficult as possible for China to attack once their restructuring is done. The stakes are clear, and the clock is ticking. What happens in the next few years will determine whether China controls the Indo-Pacific outright, or whether the nations of the region have a chance to determine their own destinies. Thank you for watching.